to experience the abundance that God longs for us in daily kinds of fashion, in daily living, is to remember that we are loved, to remember that we are cherished, to remember that we are God's workmanship, and that there's nothing that we can do or leave undone that would prevent God from loving us just the same. We are people of value. We are people of worth. And it's important to remember that. And the Gospels carry that theme forward. You know, the Gospel is about how God moves toward us to love us, to be with us, to remind us that there's no place that we could ever go that God wouldn't go to be with us. God loves us and never leaves us. In the Gospels, we remember that God so loved the world that he sent his only Son. And Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, to remind us that we are loved always. And nothing can change that. So the first thing we can do to ourselves to experience abundance in daily living is to remind ourselves of the gospel, to remind ourselves every day that we are loved, that we have worth, that we have value. We are God's workmanship. The second thing that we need to do in order to experience the abundance that Jesus wants for us to have is to go to work, because God creates us, God loves us, God sees us and sees value in us, but God also blesses us and calls us to do work. To do the work that he calls for us to do. And that's what we begin to realize is if we're going to look for life in our daily living, if we're going to look for abundance in our daily living, we need to go to work. And this is what we see from the beginning of time. In creation in Genesis, when life was perfect, God speaks everything into being. And what he does on the sixth day is he creates humankind in his own image. This is what we read. Genesis 1:27, God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So God clearly creates us, crafts us to be image bearers, to reflect his image to the world around us. But then right after that, he blesses us with work. As we continue in Genesis 1:28, God blesses them, blesses us, and he says to us, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. After God creates us in his image, God's craftsmanship, he gives us work to do, but he doesn't just give us any work to do, he gives us his work to do. God gives us his creative work. He hands us the keys to the kingdom. He gives us the corner office. He gives us day-to-day responsibility, stewarding all of the operation. It's our job to be fruitful and multiply. It's our job to steward the garden, to steward paradise, to make it filled to overflowing, to care for, to have dominion over all things, to order creation the same way that God first ordered creation. God blesses us, gives us work to do, gives us his work to do, his creative efforts. This is our calling. This is our charge. This is what we see in Genesis, but you also see this in the Gospels. As you continue in the Gospels, what you see is you see Jesus going and doing the same thing. Jesus invites his disciples to go and do likewise regularly. He calls us, he blesses us to follow him. And as we continue reading in the Gospels, what we see is in John 14:12, Jesus says, those who believe in me will also do the works that I do. In fact, they will do greater works than these. Just one chapter after that, Jesus says, you didn't choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last. Jesus invites us, equips us to do the things that he does. He urges us to share in his creative work, to follow him, to go and do likewise. This is the work that God calls us into, that God blesses us with, that God equips us with. It has nothing to do with our job or our occupation. And so if you're wondering how it is that we might find meaning, how it is that we might find purpose or abundance in our daily living, it's to recognize that God's call has nothing to do with our job, our occupation. But God's call has to do with this work that is placed before us to do the things that Jesus did, to do the things that God first did, to engage in a life that reflects the image of God by how it is that we seek to love one another or serve one another or care for one another the same way that God first does for us.